Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
Well, activist Charlie Kirk was assassinated nearly 2 weeks ago. During his memorial service, his widow publicly forgave his alleged killer. But for most of us, forgiveness, especially those who hurt us deeply, feels like the impossible task. Our Morning Light panel has some answers this morning.
Yeah, that will certainly be a good discussion.
It's going to be a good one.
But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. Our Bible Education 101 series continues this week. The topic, ape men. So here is the question. How do fossils correspond with what the Bible has to say? You will find out.
Ape men. That's exciting. Yeah. Well, the debate over the political legacy of conservative activist Charlie Kirk will continue. Tens of thousands, of course, attended his memorial service in Arizona on Sunday. But words from his widow, Erika, are the most likely to be remembered.
I forgive him because it was what Christ did and is what Charlie would do. The answer to hate is not hate. The answer we know from the gospel is love, and always love. Love for our enemies and love for those who persecute us.
Mrs. Kirk's message was in contrast to comments made by President Donald Trump. Take a listen to what he had to say about forgiveness.
That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I am sorry, Erika. But now Erika can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that that's not right, but I can't stand my opponent.
And that wasn't all the president had to say. He said he knew Charlie would not be very happy with how he feels about forgiveness. The president did go on to say that Charlie Kirk was a missionary with a noble spirit and great purpose, and only wanted the best for his opponents.
But wait a second. If you're too hard on yourself or the president, he's not alone. Earlier this year, a global flourishing study of some 200,000 adults from more than 20 countries found 25% of people say they rarely or never forgive those who hurt them. Does that surprise you? It's a little high. The study found older people, including those who attend religious services, are more likely to forgive. So the question to the Morning Light panel might be an obvious one. Why do Christians make such a big deal out of forgiveness? Pastor Josiah Malinich, Cynthia Lyons, and Luke Covert will weigh in this morning. This is an interesting study in contrast. The same event, the same podium, two different expressions. What I sensed from President Trump was deep, honest, raw. Erika expressing what the Christian faith, the imperative of the Christian faith. But I'll be very honest, in this parable of if I am Trump or I am Erika, I'm likely going to identify much more with President Trump in the raw humanness of that moment, that I do not want to forgive someone who ends the life of my spouse. Josiah, give me the framework, the framing of the Christian teaching on forgiveness and why it's such a big deal.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. I think when I think about this specific issue, we're flesh, but we're also spiritual beings. And so I think when I look at it, I see when Jesus makes a statement to the disciples who couldn't pray with him an hour in the garden. And he comes back to them, and we all know the verse, and he says, the flesh isn't willing, the spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. And so we always look at that as almost like a rebuke, but I almost see it, Jesus is even saying, I'm submitting that same claim unto you as the Son of God. I was just praying, asking God to take this cup of death from me in my flesh. And so I think what you see here is President Trump, a very fleshly response to the part where that's our humanity relating. And even with Erika, it's beautiful to see what she says, but to me, it's looking at the part of, I think that's just her spirit being willing. In the flesh, she doesn't want to say that. Right. That's just her submission unto her spirit, knowing, man, if Christ died, forgave me, it can do the same. Because the Apostle Paul talks about forgiveness 7 times specifically in his letters, even more so than that in other writings. But we have to look at, our heart is to forgive those as Christ forgave us. But that doesn't mean our flesh wants to do that. That's that submission part to the spirit. So I think you're right. We can relate on both sides, because my flesh would say the same thing about someone who hurts me. But watching her that is the fundamentals of our faith, not always agreeing even with what we're saying, but by doing it by faith.
It's helpful. Cynthia, there's a long line of tragedy in the American story. In the modern story, beginning in the civil rights movement in the 60s to present day, there have been many, many widows, and not every widow has forgiven. Ethel Kennedy did not forgive to her deathbed, as we know Sirhan for killing RFK. Myrlie Evers, when Medgar Evers was gunned down, she was 29 years old, had kids. Her kids saw Medgar shot in the carport of that car. This is what she said later in life. She goes, "There is power in strength. There is power in anger." And then this is later in life. She says, "There's power in forgiveness. I have sampled all of those." We sample a lot of emotions. We saw, I think, in the State Farm Arena, a sampling of emotions. You're a follower of Jesus, but you're also a wife who can identify with this scenario. How have you squared it up since those moments on Sunday?
I don't know that I have, to be honest. And I look at this as my husband as well as my children. I have children that are close to those ages.
Yeah.
I don't know. The only thing I can tell you is watching Erika Kirk speak on Sunday morning and have such poise and grace 2 weeks after the murder of her husband showed me that we should be the hands and feet. Because frankly, for her to be able to verbalize it and say, this is what Jesus wants, this is what Charlie would have wanted. In my heart, not up to me to judge whether or not she really believed that, or really, I think she believed it, but the difficulty for her to get it out really was for me a model of what we should be as parents, as spouses. So much, I think, that we can learn from that, because in my heart, that's really, really difficult to watch and think, I don't know. Thank God I'm not there.
The reason I think many people identify with President Trump and like President Trump is because there is a sense of authenticity, that he says what the one angel on her, or whatever, the angel and the devil on the shoulder. All right?
Yeah.
But he says what is often in our hearts that we do not want to say out loud, so he says it for us.
Right.
And then Erika was almost saying, now remember, we're Christians. So how is this what you do in the Christian life? You obey first and then have your emotions and heart follow later? Yeah. How does this work for people who are looking at this saying, Christians feel wacky because this guy was just assaulted, killed, publicly assassinated. 100 million people saw this within seconds of this murder. I don't get it. Why do you say these things?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I think Trump comes out and says the reactionary thing, kind of always. You know what I mean? And that's what he did here.
Yeah.
Erika seemed to have taken time and thought in a bigger, like a zoomed out way of like, what is the ripple effect of me saying what Trump is going to say versus saying what Christ says to say, which is forgive people like 7 times 7 or whatever the thing is. And I do think there is the left values the end result, right? It's like the ends justify the means, right? Like, so what we're going to do is we're going to, try and make utopia, and whatever the cost, that's fine, right? It's like it's a messed up way of thinking about, but the good, they want the good at the end. I feel like this is a version of that. There's some weird common ground here, where Erika is saying, for the greater good, I'm going to forgive. It's almost like Christ saying, like, I don't want to go hang on a cross, but for the greater good of all of my children, I'm going to do that. And so when I hear Erika say that, I don't think it matters if she's feeling it yet, or if she's honest about it, or if whatever. I think she's literally zoomed out a couple levels higher than the rest of us, probably with good counsel, saying, like, for the greater good of the country, of my husband, of my kids, of my own life, of the history books, of the future of the country, forgiveness is better.
There are a lot of people today who are wrestling with something and someone, and they have a little list, and it may not be written down. It just may be a list in their head. And it can be everyone from the guy who fixed their car to their dentist, to a husband or a wife who had an affair, to a child who isn't calling them back. And they are justifying this tension here because the offense is so great. Then you have murder. So, like, square this for me, how you, in the regular, is this the example in all of the regular things of life? When the dentist overcharges, or the person overcharges you at the restaurant, or somebody cuts you off in traffic, it's the same principle, or is it different?
I think it's the same principle. I think that's why the cross is so offensive. The cross is so offensive because it puts us all on the same playing field. All of our sin is equal. All of the justice level is equal. So there are times where the only time you actually see sin is greater is oftentimes in sexual sin, when Paul or Christ says it's against your own self, it's against the body. And so I think that's what we're dealing with when you think about forgiveness. It's this concept of, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know, where I should reconcile that. But it's offensive to think that murder is on the same, level as, again, being cheated out of a certain, $5. But at the end of the day, it's a heart issue. And constantly, that's why Jesus came, right? He didn't say, I came to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. And people think he made the standard easier, he made the standard harder, right? He said, don't murder. I say don't hate. And so I think that tension, that is why it's offensive, because again, people, to your point of, people who still haven't publicly forgiven for big events, it's the same as, I'm not going to talk to you at Thanksgiving this year because you have a different belief than me. And I think in unforgiveness there's no freedom there. I think that's bondage for yourself.
A lot of people on the outside looking in, Cynthia, at this.
Well, no, isn't that forgiveness? Like, forgiveness isn't about you. It's about me.
Right.
Like, I'm the one that can be seething. Like, how often do we go 20 years down the road and I call and go, listen, I'm really sorry. And they're like, for what?
Right.
And really, it's not about you. It's about me, because the more we continue to hold that in our heart, the more we go from, well, somebody didn't call me back, or like my dentist overcharged me, to all of a sudden our teeth are rotting out because we think they're horrible. And they go, wow, I wish you would have just called.
There's a lot of Donald Trump in us that is on the outside of Christianity looking in. We would rather sometimes not have to do the Christian thing. Take the last 30 seconds and give a little bit of hope for people who are just like, you guys look really nice, you're well dressed and clean, but I'm not, I don't have that power.
Hope for why we're well dressed and clean, or
hope for the person who's locked into unforgiveness.
Oh, locked into unforgiveness. I don't know. I mean, personally, in my own life, the real enemy is resentment. You know what I mean? And that's the killer for me. And resentment is usually justified. And I've found that I don't have the luxury of having just sort of righteous anger and righteous resentment toward people, even if it's validated, because like you said, it eats away at me. It causes my life to be worse, just objectively worse. And you can ask my wife about that.
It's the ripple effect.
It's the ripple effect. And so forgiveness is a way out of that resentment for me. And in this case, I mean, we sound wacky because it's a wacky situation.
Grace is wacky and awesome at the same time. Thank you very much for weighing into the deep end today on forgiveness. Well, the concept of cavemen has intrigued scientists and Christians alike for generations. So what does the Bible have to say about club-wielding humans? Well, the answer is in our Bible Education 101 series. You're watching Morning Light right here on Lighthouse TV.
Welcome back. The concept of ape men or cavemen is a topic of debate among religious leaders and scientists. So what does the Bible have to say? Joining me is Henry Smith, the host of Lighthouse TV's Digging for Truth. Henry, thanks for being with us. So the topic this week is ape men. Some people say cavemen. So where did people live after the flood, and what does the Bible say?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? We think of cavemen, usually we think of people who aren't as intelligent, brutish kind of looking, that kind of idea. But it's sort of an evolutionary idea. People did live in caves, but it doesn't mean that they were brutish or unintelligent, right? That just means that they lived in caves because they didn't have any other choice. Probably in the early post-flood world is the way that I think we should understand living in caves. When we think about looking at the skeletons and things like that from a scientific standpoint, just need to be careful about the assumptions that are made. We want to talk to people about there's a lot of imagination that surrounds the reconstruction of skeletons. So just because something looks like it's brutish doesn't mean that the person was actually brutish. We need to be really careful about that.
Well, and that's what scientists say, that there's evidence of the evolution of man. Yes. But what are Christians saying? Yeah,
I think, well, we want to begin with what the Bible says about the origin of man, right? We've talked about the creation of Adam and Eve, and all of us are descended from Adam. Paul makes this very clear in Romans 5, and so forth and so on. So the big picture is to understand the evidence from that perspective. And then to look at the evidence, we have to understand what the scientists have is very fragmentary. We have skeletons that are found, but there's very few of them in terms of the scope of how many people who have lived over history. And there's a clear demarcation between creatures that are clearly not human and other ones that appear to be human, do human things like bury their dead, make jewelry, make fire, care for the sick, that kind of evidence. And we could see a clear distinction between those in the skeletal record, and I think that's important for people to know.
So talk to us about life after the flood. Is that where are we finding these skeletons?
Yeah, our understanding, if the flood is worldwide, which is what our understanding of it is, then all the skeletons we find would be what we would call post-flood life. People living in the post-flood world after the catastrophe of the flood. So that's kind of the broad way to understand it. And then understanding that there's some diversity in the appearance of humans in the past. We are called Homo sapiens, right, is the word that we use. There are others such as Neanderthals whose skull structures and skeletal structures slightly different, but they appear to have been human. Just because they looked a little different doesn't mean they were human, nor does it mean that they descended from subhuman creatures. So those are the kind of things that I think we want to think about very carefully.
So what advice can you give parents, grandparents? Because kids who go to public schools, they receive a different type of education about man.
Yeah, I think we begin with the Bible. This is God's revelation. It comes from God, who has an infinite mind. When he records what he says about the origin of man, that's the truth. That's the foundation. Then if you want to pursue the scientific aspect of it, we want to encourage Christians not to be afraid of pursuing that, because the truth will always prevail. But always remember that the study of evidence is very limited. We only have a very small, limited slice of what happened in the past. Even in the world of archaeology, we've only dug up maybe 2 or 3% of all the places that have been lived in over the millennia, right? That's only a very small percentage. So I would say pursue the study of these things to God's glory, but test everything, as Paul says, and hold on to the good. Be wise about how you understand it. Understand how the evolutionists interpret the evidence, and that there might be alternative ways to understand it.
Now, I love that, because you do need to research this.
Yes.
And there are so many resources available.
Well, that's right. And there's a lot of research being done. That's one thing we do on Digging for Truth. We invite guests onto the show who specialize in these areas to share with our audience, to share with Christians, why we can believe what the Bible says. And here's the physical evidence outside the Bible. And here's a way of understanding it that's consistent with what the scriptures teach.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us, Henry.
Love coming on the show.
Coming up next on Morning Light, find out what fossil evidence supports the claim that cavemen were human. We will talk with a creation paleontologist next. The debate over creation and evolution continues to dominate conversations. So what do the fossils found prove? Joining me to answer that question is Dr. Marcus Ross, creation paleontologist with Cornerstone Educational Supply. Dr. Ross, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Please share with us your experience with paleontology and Cornerstone Educational Supply.
Well, thanks very much. My background is I'm a fossils and rocks guy. I did an undergraduate and a master's and a PhD, all in the geosciences and with a special emphasis on paleontology, studying fossils of animals like dinosaurs, but especially mosasaurs, big swimming marine reptiles. I taught at Liberty University as the geology professor there for 16 years. And starting in 2021, I moved out of teaching full-time so that I could work with Cornerstone Educational Supply. This is a company my wife and I started, and we make science supplies for homeschoolers, distance learners, colleges and universities. My wife likes to say we are the science stuff people.
Very interesting. So let's talk about after the flood. Let's go back to that time. What did the world really look like when Noah came off the ark?
Well, that's a good question. We have to speculate a little bit. We have some clues from the biblical record, and then we dive into the world around us to try to understand from science. After Noah gets off of the ark, we expect that the world is starting to settle down a good bit, but not entirely. There's probably still some movements of the continental plates around. There is, differences in climate overall, probably still fairly warm with all of the activity geologically and what had happened during the flood. So we would expect probably still fairly warm and equitable conditions in large parts of the world, which will help facilitate those animals to move around and to migrate to new locations over time.
So let's talk about humans, though, and what do the fossils show us as far as humans versus non-humans or ape men?
So there are a whole class of fossils that we refer to in paleontology and anthropology as hominins. And hominins are the group of organisms that are a little bit more similar to us than they are to, say, chimpanzees. So we've got the great apes that are alive today, we've got us, and then there's this class of fossils that is a little bit more like us than it is like chimpanzees. Some of them are very similar to us, and in fact are actually just variations of humanity. Those would be things like the Neanderthals. In my opinion, also things like Homo erectus. We have lots of evidence from them in anthropology for their skeletons that show that they're very similar to modern humans and distinct from, say, modern apes and some of the fossil apes, but also they display certain kinds of behaviors that ally them with humans. Now, there are other fossils out there, such as the well-known Lucy fossil as a member of Australopithecus afarensis, and several other species and genera in those groups that are non-humans. Even though anatomically they're a little more similar to us than they are to chimps, there are also good physical indicators in the fossil record and cultural markers that are lacking, like not being able to use fire or not being able to build tools with forethought to create a shape, for example, that they want, that seem to exclude them from being human. So I think creationists are in good standing right now to be able to say, yes, in the fossil record, there is some clear separation between what is human and what is not human.
And beside the fossils, what other types of evidence is there between humans and ape men?
So those cultural evidences that I just mentioned are several. I had mentioned the use of fire, being able to control and use fire. We can also see that human beings are capable of long-distance migration and travel into places that other animals would not be able to go to, would fear to go to, would not have the resources to be able to get to. So we can look at humans migrating across seas and oceans to get to new islands that would be difficult for animals, for example, to be able to make those migrations. Those are some of the sorts of cultural indicators that we have. And with something like travel, what that also gives us a good indication of is the capacity of those species, such as Homo erectus and Neanderthal, to be fully human, because to travel those distances and to go across oceans requires communication. It requires you to be able to steer and tell people what to do and where to go and how fast to get there, and convince the rest of your clan that going someplace dangerous is actually a good idea.
And because of all of these things, I mean, it's something that this is not something that is taught in school today.
Yes, the dominant perspective within academia is that humans evolved from non-human ancestors, and that this was a process that took millions of years in order to get to where we are today. For the young Earth creationist, on the other hand, I think that we've got some very good indicators that this was happening quickly after Noah's flood, and that, again, there's clear separation between who are humans and who happen to be our apes and various non-human types of creatures.
Dr. Ross, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this insight with us this morning.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
For more information about Cornerstone Educational Supply, check out cornerstone-edsupply.com. Coming up next week, our final segment in our Bible Education 101 series. Find out where experts think Noah's Ark landed. Stay with us. We're back right after the break. Welcome back. Coming up tomorrow morning, Light, touching hearts worldwide. The Tide wants to make sure every ear hears the life-saving message of the gospel. Plus, find out how you can help the Tide celebrate 79 years of ministry. And that's a look at what's coming up tomorrow on Morning Light. Now, Jeff, your closing thoughts.
Well, thank you, Debra. Well, the ancient Greeks said, when it comes to the dead, say nothing but good. The Apostle Paul had a very different view. In his letter to the Romans, he wrote, none of us lives to himself. None of us dies to himself. If we live, we die to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. In other words, we do not control and we do not write. We're not the authors of our own story. We want people to say good things about us when we're gone. That's a natural instinct. But if we're Christians, if we're followers of Jesus, it's far better to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, that any good they see in us is because of God's grace, that we've all sinned, we've all fallen short, we've all failed ourselves and each other more times than we can count. So when an obituary is a posthumous PR statement about our goodness, about our greatness, about our accomplishment, somehow it misses the point that God loved us first, that his grace was greater than a lifetime of sin. The gospel isn't for good people, for nice people, but for people who need it, like me. For Debra and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for watching. Go check on your neighbors today, and then let's meet right back here tomorrow morning.